Oh, Jesus! So I want to know if you can use VR to train for historical European martial arts of any kind. I've played the vanilla version of VR Skyrim. While there's some cool stuff you can do, and I can review that game at some other point, maybe with some mods, it just doesn't do it. The best game that I've seen so far is a game called Blade and Sorcery that you can find on Steam for about 20 bucks. So I'm going to go over the pros and cons of that. I want to find out if this will be useful for myself and for people who can't find a fencing club or don't have time to go fencing all the time, or don't have access to resources such as weapons and training equipment. Maybe VR could be some kind of alternative. And while it's nowhere near the same, there are some benefits you can get out of it, and I think it does have some value. Before I get into anything, just overall, this is a pretty fun game. There are swords and magic, as the name implies. And while I'll go over the pros and cons in a minute, this game is still worth playing just for the fun of it, whether you can get HEMA training out of it or not. The game has a pretty good amount of historical weapons to choose from, and even more if you decide to get into mods. Alright, so first let's take a look at the vanilla version of this game. What's really neat here is the blade contact. Weapons don't just clip through each other, they actually stick, and you can manipulate them with another blade. The guards on these weapons are fully functional too, even the small guard on this knife here. It will stop a blade if it catches on it. It even simulates the different strengths of the sword pretty well. Another cool feature is that axes, such as this bearded axe here, can actually catch and manipulate weapons and shields just like they do in real life, which is really freaking cool. The shields are very realistic, I think. This buckler is exactly like a buckler that you can buy on Amazon from Cold Steel, and it functions exactly the same. This kite shield is exactly like the one that we've been using at our club recently. The, I guess, Viking shield you would call it is not quite the right size. It's a little small. The grip is not in the center as it should be. But there are shields of this size that it does mimic the qualities of. Now, as for the arena mode, which is where you can do some free fencing, I guess you can call it, I suggest using training mode because that's the only mode that basically allows you to fight one-on-one versus opponents. Otherwise, they send multiple opponents after you, and it gets a little too crazy for you to focus on anything. So for the quality, for the purpose of training, this is the best mode to use, as the name implies. All right, so let's take a look at the longsword. This is the main focus of most HEMA fencing, as it is the main focus of surviving fencing manuals from the late medieval period. You can use any guard that exists in pretty much any system, even by Corno, although it's a little awkward. One of the problems that you'll run into when trying to train in this game, though, is that the opponents only use a couple different weapons, and they only use them one-handed, so if you're trying to train against longsword with a longsword, you're not ever going to find an opponent who uses a longsword. So that kind of sucks. But that doesn't mean you can't train some techniques. Little nips and cuts to the hand still work, although they do very little damage. You can even use the Geisling. As far as regular cuts go, the game obviously favors big downward cuts. You can kill an opponent very easily with a big downward cut. Rising cuts, especially false edge cuts, seem to do very little damage. But I've also found that moves like the Zwerchow, especially one with the false edge, do very, very little damage. And the other thing is pommel strikes. If you like to use pommel strikes, they don't seem to work very often. It seems to only happen sometimes, and I don't know if I don't know what's causing that. So that kind of sucks. Thrusting works very efficiently. The amount of penetration really matters. You can even do the Degrassi one-handed thrust that a lot of people on HEMA are using right now. The enemy will never thrust at you, so any technique like a Krumpow is pretty much impossible to practice with. Even with the rapier, your opponent will never thrust at you. Hanging parries are pretty effective, especially when you're being attacked on your blind side. And you can practice a technique like the Colpi de Volano. You can even grab the blade and do half sorting. It's a little funky, but you can do it. The problem with it is that it sucks. When you do go into dungeons and actually fight armored opponents, half sorting really doesn't give you any more advantage than just using the sword normally. And since you can't use the pommel to strike at your opponent when things get close, half sorting is almost pointless. You can turn the weapon around and use the Mordhau or use the weapon like an axe, but the problem is it doesn't do anything. I really hope when they update this game, they fix this. One of the saddest realizations that I've discovered with this game is that using a reverse grip is actually pretty darn effective. And it just kind of hurts my soul. Now, if you're not trying to practice for HEMA and you just want to go through the dungeons with a longsword, the sad fact of the matter is it pretty much sucks. It moves slow. It's not nearly as fast as a longsword is in real life, and it doesn't offer any of the versatility that a longsword actually offers in real life. I mean, really, this sword should kill at this game. It has a lot of it should have a lot of options to handle armored opponents, and it should be pretty effective at close range or at long range, which is perfect when you're crawling through dungeons. The spear has the same exact problem. It's complete overkill when you're at a certain measure, but once the opponent gets too close, you have so few options. You can't really do any advanced techniques with the spear. All you can do is stick them with the pointy end. There are some kinds of combat I think this game does really well. Basic sword and buckler combat is pretty much perfect, although you really can't do the more advanced techniques which involve holding both the sword and buckler with the same hand while you use the other hand to grab. You can use a lot of sword and shield techniques from I-33 or later century rapier or small sword combinations with a shield or a dagger. I use an axe and a short sword in combination like one of my friends does who does a lot of Viking combat. And it works very well. I use the bearded axe as a carrying tool and I attack with the short sword. And it works pretty much just as it would in real life. You can also use the shield for attacking, which is very useful. And this is something you can't really practice in real life because no matter where you go, shield bashes are pretty much banned. They're just too unsafe. So this is one aspect where VR has the advantage because you can let loose with it. You can also trap your opponent's weapon by using the shield and the bearded axe together. This can be a pretty difficult move to pull off in real life or VR, but you can do it in this game. Alright, so let's take a look at the mods for this game. So the longsword is pretty slow in the base game, and there are mods and ways that you can increase the speed of the weapon, but it also seems to increase the power a bit too much and has some strange effects. Overall, I don't think that's the road to go down. What you really want to do is download the Medieval Mega Pack. This mod is absolutely insane. It's one of the most detailed mods I've ever seen in anything ever. There's over 300 extremely accurate, realistic weapons from the medieval period in Europe and honestly all over the world. I mean, after playing the vanilla version first and going through that to make the first portion of this video, this was just like a dream come true. This is everything that I wanted. But man, it's a world of difference compared to the vanilla version. Not only does it have all these weapons, but it also has new modes, which allows you to fight several different kinds of enemies in several different kinds of situations, and they all come equipped with new weapons now. So with this longsword, the pommel actually works, which is amazing. The blade is now made with points to actually grip it, so now you can turn it around and use the Mordhau. And it works just like it's supposed to work, it's amazing. You can now hold the blade properly for half sorting. You can even slide your hand up and down like John Clemens. But this allows you to hold it exactly the way you want. And with the pommel being functional for striking, you can actually do proper half sorting now. You can also set yourself to face armored opponents, and you don't have to go down the dungeon mode to do that now. And if you want a real challenge, there's a mod called the Renaissance Plate Knight, which is an armor set that adds historically accurate armor and waves of enemies that wear the armor. So you can practice your half-sorting skills against heavily armored opponents. And they're very hard to take down. Armor does function very well in this game. You cannot cut through it. You literally have to bash them to knock them to the ground, just like it's suggested in real life, or you have to wrestle in and find gaps in their armor. And that's where using the other end of the sword comes in handy. You can reverse it and not clock them in the head and then bash them to death while they're down. It really brings out the actual real-life versatility of the longsword. The spear also becomes fully functional with this mod. You can now use the other end of the spear to smack your opponent, knock them over, and even sweep them off their feet. The shield combo doesn't change too much. It is nice to have an appropriately sized shield for what you might call Viking-style combat. The real benefit here is being able to encounter more enemies with shields to actually practice against. And that's something you can only do with the mods or in the vanilla version by going into dungeons. But this genuinely feels like the actual shield combat that I have done in real life, where you have to kind of wrap around or find gaps in between the shields. So now you can just wall up enemies with the shield when an opportunity presents itself, which you cannot do in actual training. And I've heard of way too many accidents from shield just accidentally hitting somebody. I haven't covered greatswords yet because I'm afraid I was going to hit my TV. But there is a greatsword in this game that's exactly like the one I've handled in a previous video. And you can do all the techniques I've shown in that video. You can use Giacomo di Grassi's one-handed thrust, Achille Marazzo's half-sorting technique, and various other crowd control maneuvers mentioned in several fencing manuals. So it works out great. So the mod just vastly improves the game. The one thing it can't really help too much is pretty much the worst part of this game, and that's the daggers. There's nothing actually wrong with the daggers themselves. The vanilla dagger on the left functions pretty much the same as the modded dagger on the right, with a few key differences. The dagger on the right, which is a rondel dagger you see in many fencing manuals, is actually stiffer than the in-game dagger, and it's harder to pressure down. Both of them can be held in the ice pick grip or in a hammer grip. You can also grab the blade and use Fiore's middle iron gate doubled. You can even use the middle iron gate doubled and crossed, which is kind of funky, but you can do it. Though none of the daggers have a special place to hold the blade. Maybe the modder will see this and add that. And see, there's nothing wrong with the daggers themselves. The dagger can block attacks from any other weapon, you just have to time it right. And you can get in a few historically accurate arm grabs and things like that, and even grab your opponent's weapon. But there's only a few points of contact on your opponent that you can actually grab and manipulate, and there's some really odd effects with that. And the sad reality is, as many cool things you can do in this game, no matter how tough your enemy is, you can pretty much just walk up to them and grab them in the throat and they will be immobilized, they will be paralyzed and at your mercy. I mean, you can go into a dungeon unarmed, take a step back, watch their attack whiff, and just grab them by the neck and choke slam them. Break their neck while they're on the ground, punch them to death. Just grab them by the throat, pick them up the neck like the Undertaker, choke slam them to the ground, smack their head off the turnbuckle, count to 10. Stomp a mud hole in them, walk it dry. For the most part, the NPCs will not be able to do a single thing about it. At a certain point, I just decided to stop trying to do fancy stuff and just started slapping them around, and I was legitimately killing them. I slayed many opponents with aggressive pimp slaps. And while that's amusing, it kind of takes a little bit away from it. At one point I started to just walk toward my opponents with my sword pointed forward, and I ended up just running a bunch of guys through. So yeah, the worst part of this game by far is the enemies. There are mods that make them a little more competent, but overall their lack of attacks, how slow and predictable they are. Since this is an unfinished version of the game, I hope that when it's fully released they add more to this. And there's a lot of benefit you can get. I really feel like you can use this for training. But don't go around thinking you're some kind of badass because you can beat these guys. You know, if you work for Warp Frog and you want some kind of consultant on, you know, a lot of the weapons and things like that that are featured in this game, you know, I'm available. You know, give me a call. I'm willing to help, you know.